Hi everyone, it's Cass. Welcome back to my channel, What Cass Read. Today I'm finally bringing you my September wrap-up. So September was an interesting month for me reading-wise, and that is because I was doing 2 readathons at the same time, which many of us were, but I'm also the genius that decided to put Oathbringer on my TBR for a readathon. For a readathon! Who does that? Anyways, how did I do? I actually finished 5 books in the month of September. I attempted 6, but I did DNF one of them. And then one of the books that I had wanted to finish for September, I did end up finishing in the month of October, and that was my Patreon buddy read. So you'll hear more about my thoughts about The Shadow of the Gods in that wrap-up, in my October wrap-up. Just finished it. Spoiler alert, pretty good. Okay, so for the readathon, I had like a mix of some Kindle, audio, physical form books as per usual. The first book that I finished, which I knew was going to be a good one to like check off the readathon list, was Over the Top, A Raw Journey to Self-Love, written by Jonathan Van Ness. I listened to this on audiobook because Jonathan Van Ness narrates it. I'm actually a really big fan of JVN. And to be honest, you know, on Netflix when you get to like choose your avatar, basically, JVN is mine. So that's how much I love them. If you're not a fan of JVN, I think you could get something out of it, but I think your enjoyment of it will be obviously much better if you're already a fan, because the narration and the way that the book is written is very much the way that JVN speaks, which is really fast. Sometimes there's like breaks in the story to go off on a tangent for a different thing, which are all the things that I find charming about Jonathan Van Ness, but I could see how someone who's already not into that could find that the book was really distracting. But I learned a lot about him. I learned a lot about his past and the kinds of relationships he got in, and how that affected him moving forward. You get to hear a little bit about his break on Queer Eye, and I was actually a fan of Game of Thrones. That's actually how I first started watching JVN, and yeah, he talks a little bit about that as well. So it was just an enjoyable read for me. On Goodreads, it looks like I rated this 4 out of 5 stars, which, like I said, there's things in here that I definitely appreciate. And how do you rate like an audio? How do you rate someone's like book about themselves? It's kind of hard, but I did give it a 4 out of 5 stars. Then I moved on to The Red Threads of Fortune, written by Neon Yang, the Singaporean author who is the author of the Tensorit series. Now, I had read book number 1, The Black Tides of Heaven, a couple of years ago already, and it takes place in this really interesting Asian-inspired silk punk fantasy world. We're following 2 different twins, and in this world, people do not confirm their gender until much later on in life, like practically on the verge of adulthood. And these twins that we're following are genderless at the beginning, and then they confirm their gender later on. And that's in book number 1. Now, something happened between the 2 of them in book number 1 as adults that I don't quite remember what it was. And since we jumped straight into their adult selves in book number 2, I was missing like a big piece of the puzzle. And I just couldn't get into it. And I was really, I mean, this is kind of my own fault and not the fault of the 2 readathons that I was taking part in. But I really felt pressure to just like move on to the rest of my TBR, that I decided to DNF The Red Threads of Fortune, because I was like, I don't know what's going on, and I honestly don't care. So that's where I was at with that. I mean, maybe I'll come back to it, but I definitely need a refresher on the first book before I could move on. Because as short as it was, I thought, oh, I'll be fine, but I wasn't. So that was my 1 DNF of the month. Now, this whole time I was working on Oathbringer, so let's talk about it. Obviously, maybe not obvious. I don't know. I should stop saying obviously, but I did give this a 5 out of 5 stars. Oathbringer is the third book in the Stormlight Archive series written by Brandon Sanderson. Book number 4 is something that's on my to-buy list for the month of October because the paperback version will finally be out, and then I can catch up. But I don't know if I will read Rhythm of War anytime soon, and here's why. I feel like I got a little bit burnt out on Oathbringer. Oathbringer is a long book. It was definitely the craziest idea I've ever had. I labeled my September TBR the most insane TBR of all time, mostly because I was trying to complete Oathbringer in the middle of a readathon. And I don't think I'll ever read an 1100-page book in the middle of a readathon ever again. Was this 1100 or 1200? Oh no, this is 1200, not 1100 pages. And I was definitely feeling it. So what can I say about Oathbringer that's not spoilery? I will do my spoiler-filled talk of this just like I have been doing for the other books in the Stormlight Archive, but I felt like I was reading multiple different books instead of one complete story this whole time. This book definitely felt different from the other two. Of course, we follow Dalinar Kholin's past in this book, and that was probably like the most alarming part of this book was Dalinar Khollin's past. His past self was definitely a shock to my system. And like I said, I'll talk more about that in my spoiler-filled talk, but I think that was the whole point. The whole point is the character that we've come to know and appreciate, the past self doesn't always line up with the current self. And the journey that we follow along to get to his present self, it was different. It was different than I was expecting, and I was getting a little bit of anxiety reading about his past, not gonna lie. The other thing that was kind of an annoying thing for me was Shallan. I do enjoy Shallan. Now I want to get that out right away. I do enjoy Shallan, but she is not my favorite character in this whole story, and there was a lot of things in here that I was like, I do not like where this is going. The other thing that I will say about book number 3 is I feel like books number 1 and number 2, there was like a quest involved, and this one felt a little bit more broken up in terms of the plot. There were some very big shocking character moments in here. I had a lot of feelings about this book while I was reading it. It was just like, I was getting anxiety. I was really shocked at some of the things that I was reading, which is like super telltale marker of a really, really great book. Having read the first 3 books in the Stormlight Archive, book number 2, Words of Radiance, is that my favorite? Or is The Way of Kings, because we follow Kaladin? I think the revelations we get in book number 2, Words of Radiance, I felt like I got a bigger bomb drop in book number 2. I feel like book number 1, following Kaladin's story, that having read the first 3 is still my favorite backstory. And this one was just like really intense and emotional. So I guess I have very, very different feelings about all 3 of them. But this was a 5 out of 5 star read. This next book was the biggest surprise of the year so far, as of like September. Once we get to my October wrap up, I have a different answer for this. But the next book that I read and absolutely fell in love with, gave this a 5 out of 5 stars, is Red Rising, written by Pierce Brown. I am shocked at how much I loved this book. I am shocked that it took me so long to pick up. Reading this book actually prompted me to film another video, like whole series, like something I had been thinking about for a long time, but reading this like reignited my passion to film this video, and that is just like how surprisingly how much I love this book. So Red Rising is book number 1 of the Red Rising saga. Originally started as a trilogy, then it ended up being a 5-book series. This follows a young man named Darrow who grew up on Mars, and there's a caste system on the planet where they're based on different colors, and the Reds are the very lowest caste. Now, what makes Reds so unique is they are mining this really precious resource called helium-3, because they're trying to terraform the planet of Mars, and apparently Reds are the only ones who are capable of mining the resource. So we follow along with Darrow at the very beginning while he's in the mines. Now, we come to find out very early on that the Reds have actually been enslaved this whole time, and Mars has been terraformed for a very, very long time. And we get into this secret uprising plot of which Darrow is at the center of, and that's just such a small snippet of what this book is actually about. And that's why I loved it so much, because like the synopsis doesn't actually tell you like 90% of what happens in this book, and the rest of what happens in this book was mind-blowing. There were so many shocking moments, so many heart-wrenching moments. I did listen to this on audiobook. It's available on Scribd as an audiobook, and if you haven't read it, I really enjoyed the audiobook. There were some like musical moments where he sang, and it really made me feel all the feelings. And his accent starts off one way, but then as he's, you know, moving along in the story, his accent has to change. And then the audiobook narrator's accent changed a little bit too, and it just fit. It just fit with the whole story. It was so awesome. So I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. One of my favorite books of the year. Now, I did put books number 2 and 3 on my October TBR, so I'm very, very excited. I'm planning on listening to those on audiobook as well. Yeah, new favorite, Red Rising. I'm very happy. That was actually my chance read in Becca's Bookoplathon, and it just like all the pieces came together for me to absolutely fall in love with that book. Now, the final 2 books that I ended up finishing are both by the same author, and I had 2 very different feelings about them. So, which one should I do? Which one should I do? I finished Queen of Shadows, book number 4 of the Throne of Glass series, and I finished Crescent City, which is I finished House of Earth and Blood, which is book number 1 of the Crescent City series. Let's go with this one. This one I read, I think it was for both the Magical Readathon and Becca's Bookoplathon, or maybe it was just, I don't remember now. I do know that this was definitely for my character read for the Magical Readathon. I had to read something for an Earthling, and I needed an element, and so this one definitely fit the bill for that. So check that off. As far as my passage through the Novice Path, I passed because I read 2 books, and I was building my character. I accomplished a majority of it in the month of September. My final book that I needed to read was going to be The Eye of the World, written by Robert Jordan, book number 1 of The Wheel of Time. I don't know when I'm going to get to that one, but I realized as I was reading The Shadow of the Gods for my Patreon buddy read that I can use The Shadow of the Gods for that outside prompt, which I also needed to build an Earthling. So we're good on the readathon now. Now let's get to actually talking about this, House of Earth and Blood. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I'm very surprised because maybe I had built this up a little bit too much, and this also prompted me to film, you know, this video series. It's just going to be 2 videos. This ended up being my most disappointing read of the year. Very, very surprised. Most disappointing read because I had built this up to be, this is Sarah J. Maas's most recently released book, and then she came out with more in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. But this was a 2020 release, so it's very recent. And I had been working on Queen of Shadows at the same exact time. So I was listening to this on audiobook, I was reading this on Kindle, and this was written in 2015. This was written in published in 2020. So within 5 years, she has released a lot of books since then. She finished the Throne of Glass series, she published new books in her ACOTAR series, and then came out with a brand new series. I kind of expected a little bit more growth, especially since she had established this as her first adult novel. The only thing that made this an adult novel was that there was just like an overabundance of the F word. I'm not someone who is very prudish towards swearing. I myself sometimes swear like a sailor. It was not good swearing, you know, like whenever I had taken a creative writing class in college or in high school or whatever, I was always kind of taught that use the swear word when there's no other option, or use the swear word when it fits with the character. Use the swear word when it fits. This was not good example of that at all. This was a very juvenile approach to swearing. And maybe Sarah J Maas doesn't swear in her everyday life, but it was very obvious on the page that the characters, like the way that the dialogue was written, it was just not good. It was not good. It was so unbelievable. So that kind of took me out of the story. I was filming my weekly update for my patrons, and I got into a little bit of a rant about this book as well. Because does anyone know what Sarah J Maas's favorite word is? It's incarnate. And do you know how I know that? Because I was reading 2 Sarah J Maas books at the same time, and that's literally the only word she knows how to use. Death incarnate, shadow incarnate, like everything incarnate. And I was like, all right, do you have an editor? Maybe utilize your editor. Because it was very, like, it just was astounding to me, the lack of growth in her writing in the last 5 years. And maybe she doesn't want to. Maybe she's fine. I mean, she's obviously sold millions of books. She's doing her thing. She's making her money. She doesn't need to listen to me on that one. But I don't know, as a reader, I just kind of expected a little bit more out of her first adult novel. Maybe she shouldn't have billed it as adult, and then I wouldn't have this particular issue with it. So, what is this book about? This book follows a young woman named Bryce Quinlan in this, like, magical metropolis called Crescent City. And this was another gripe of mine, but there's literally like every kind of magical creature inside Crescent City because it's this metropolis. So there's fae, there's angels, there's little sprites, there's water sprites, there's every kind of magical creature, and there's werewolves, like shapeshifters. Bryce and her best friend, they're, you know, renowned party girls, and Bryce is out on the town one night and her best friend is brutally murdered. It's haunted Bryce's life since that moment. And when we meet up with her, she's not living her life to the fullest anymore. There's the mystery of what happened and how her best friend was murdered, and that gets brought back up again. So we meet a detective and they have to kind of reluctantly work together, that kind of plot line. Bryce has a mysterious past that we don't really know about. It reads like a Sarah J Maas book, and it should have satiated, you know, it should have satisfied me, but I think the way that it was billed completely did a disservice to this book. So don't go into this thinking that it's going to be this prolific adult novel. Just consider it a YA novel with a lot of use of the F word. Also, I think it was billed as like something with like super sexy times. A Court of Mist and Fury had better sexy times than that one. And that one's way young adult. Technically young adult. You know what I mean? Like, she kind of like lives in this like middle ground of like, where do her books sit on the shelf? Like, how are they categorized? They should just make their own Sarah J Maas section and put all of her books there, because then I feel like I wouldn't have been as disappointed. But all that to say, Queen of Shadows, I did give this a 4 out of 5 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I loved the progression of Selena throughout this book. I loved the progression of where we are headed. I loved her interactions with Rowan. I loved the interactions of the witches. Everything about this was such a satisfying read in comparison to Crescent City. So that makes me wonder if, you know, by the time we reach book 4 of a 7-book series, she's hit her stride with the characters, she's hit her stride with the series, and that book is the start of a brand new series, and she hasn't quite settled into those characters yet. I'm not entirely sure. But this one was a much more satisfying Sarah J Maas read for me, and I am currently reading and working on Empire of Storms, which is book number 5. So there you have it. That is my long overdue September wrap-up. But let me know what you thought about these books in the comment section below. Have you read any of these? I'm particularly interested to hear what you also think about Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood. Maybe I'll do a whole spoiler-filled talk about that one, so that way I can just like get it all out. You know what I mean? I feel like I already did that with my weekly update for my patrons, but I guess not. And then I do also plan on filming my spoiler-filled video of Oathbringer, so be on the lookout for that one. But if you've read any of those, let me know what you think about them in the comment section below. How is your October reading going? You can let me know all of those things either in the comment section below, or you can follow me on my Instagram and Twitter. It's at whatcassread, the same as this channel, so it should be super easy for you to find. Goodreads is where you can also find me, and that's how you can tell what I am currently and actively reading. Patreon. That is listed down below if you are new to my community and want to support my content in that way. The link to join up on my Patreon is down below. Otherwise, you know how these videos end. I'll talk to you later. Bye.